So, listening is one of the most powerful, one of the most important, one of the most amazing subjects. And I really want to tell you so much about it. And I really don't want to take more than 15 minutes. And you're going to help me do that. There was a song that we used to love in I guess it was the 60s or the 70s about what the world needs now is love, sweet love. You remember that? The world was in chaos then, and we would play that song. What the world needs now is listening. We're dying from the lack of listening. What the world needs now is a very special kind of listening. And we helpers know something about listening. Many of us have been listening, for many years. And people who aren't designated listeners have been listening for many years. It's as if we have a secret that shouldn't be a secret. It's as if we have a vaccine for the social ills and crisis of our time. But then there's something about a vaccine, like we imagine, where we hope, like a vaccine, you take it and then you don't get viruses anymore or something. You don't get that virus anymore. Listening isn't like that. It's more like something that has to be again and again and again. You don't listen once and for all. So in a way, that analogy isn't so good, but I liked it anyway. So I hope you give me poetic license for that. And listening is an antidote. It's an antidote when you feel triggered and you feel upset and you feel sick inside with the way people are talking to each other on social media, on the news, in your neighborhoods, in your families. That awful feeling, do you know what I mean? You have that? Just raise your hand. That body feeling, it is so awful. And we all have that. I don't want to send you there today, but what I want to flag that body feeling up, because the antidote to that feeling, the antidote is this special kind of listening that we know about. And sometimes we focusers know about this kind of listening, and helpers sometimes know about this listening. And when it's translated into the communal arena, to the larger world, somehow we forget about it. It's like, oh, well, we're not in therapy. We're not going to do that. Why? Why, if we know this, why don't we use it in the world? We have something so important to use in the world. So just to say a few things that we know as helpers and we know as focusers. Before I say that, I was just having this memory of being in Mexico for the conference and doing a workshop on community empowerment. There were people from all over the world there. Maybe some of you people were there. And I remember saying that I felt like we need to enter into that more global space of community empowerment, and that we have something. And many people there said, oh, I've been feeling so helpless about the world. And I've been feeling like there's nothing I have, there's nothing I can do. I didn't even think I have focusing. I didn't even think, oh, focusing could help there. I thought of focusing as something where you go inside and you settle yourself. I didn't think of focusing as something that helps the world. And that translation is so important, that focusing helps us and it helps our interactions with our loved ones and with our clients and with our family. And it helps the world because the inner and the outer are one system. We are one dynamic system. It's not like we have some things the inner and some things the outer. So we know that secret. We know that we are not separate entities floating around trying to connect with each other, that we are made out of connection. We are made out of interaction. That's what Jean calls interaction first. And we know that listening is the vehicle of that connectedness. Not only listening with our ears and our concepts, which is very important, but listening with our whole bodies, listening with our spirits, listening with our guts. We know as helpers that listening is like the circular system. It's like the bloodline. It's like the oxygen that we breathe. Listening is so fundamental, and the kind of listening and the quality of listening makes the difference between trauma and healing. It makes the difference between hopelessness and hope. It makes the difference between alienation and connectedness. It makes the difference between demoralization and the sense of connectedness and being with ourselves and with each other. And we know that we have to listen, that focusing is about listening to ourselves and listening to the other, and now listening to the larger systems. We want to add that in there as part of the same process. We can't leave ourselves out. And that's what you were saying, Melinda, right? If you try to leave yourself out and just listen to the others, especially the people that trigger you or that you disagree with. Disagree is such a mild word compared to this moment where disagreeing would be a blessing. If we can get to the point to disagree with somebody, wow, we've come a long way. Because to disagree means that we understand the point of conflict and that we are a system that disagrees. So let's just pray for disagreement, okay? But we know that we have to be listened to, and that we have to listen to ourselves in order to listen. And we know that listening is the healing process, and being a listener heals us. It broadens our world, it settles us, it reminds us that we're one big system. It illuminates us when you're listening to someone, deeply listening to someone who triggers you, and you're listening in that way that we're going to unfold. It's like, wow, oh, I never knew that it could be like that. I never knew that world, because you're entering into, when you're listening that way, you're entering into another person's experiential world, which is unique and amazing and infinitely intricate. And it's interconnected with our world in ways that are surprising. So we're listening for that surprise. Maybe we'll show that little picture with the tree, Melinda, and if you have that up there. And I'm thinking of the different names that we talk about listening. You know, we used to talk about listening and focusing. Active listening was Carl Rogers' name. And I decided to call this broader listening radical listening. Radical listening might get our attention. This isn't regular listening. This is radical listening, and we have to be radical to listen in this way. The other name that was important to me is generous listening. Generous listening is important because, the whole talk that I'm giving is about generous listening. But I'll say now, and then we'll go into it more. It's not a tit for tat. It's not like, oh, I really need the oxygen of being listened to, so I'll listen to you, and then you'll listen to me. Maybe we'll have that other quote about most people. You put that up, Melinda, and I'll say it. Greg Madison shared this quote with me. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand, but the intent to reply. Wow, isn't that true? Isn't that true for the most skilled of us, for the most well-meaning of us, to the most the most spiritual of us? We listen to reply, not to understand. Okay, you can take that away now, Melinda, because I think we're getting it in our hearts. What is it to listen to really understand rather than to listen to reply? That's what generous listening is. Another way that we might talk about this special kind of listening that goes with focusing is embodied listening. We're listening with our whole bodies, not just with our heads, not just with our concepts. And another word that I love is generative listening. Not only generous, but when we listen this way, we are generating something, and we are creating, we're being generative. We are the midwives of a process. And that is so empowering and so heartening. We know about that when we listen to ourselves, right? And we know about that at those moments when we can do it with others. That when we can listen as a voyage, that we're creating something new. Do other people have some other words? And then we're going to go into more detail about these things. Do other people have some other words for the kind of listening that we do connected to focusing?
Please just unmute yourself if you have something to say.
Receptive And responsive listening is another one that I like, that captures something about that attitude that we need for real listening. Anybody else word to use?
Loving.
Aha, a loving kind of listening. Yes. And that's partly that focusing attitude of curiosity, interest, welcome. It's the welcome of lovingness. But you know, I love that song about what the world needs now is love, and I love the idea of what we need is loving listening. But sometimes I can confuse that. I love the person so much, I'm going to set them straight. I'm listening to them to, oh no, don't think about it that way. Think about it this way. Not that kind of loving, right? It's the kind of loving that is trusting the process and sitting the child of the process on your knee, always ready for it to. This was a metaphor from Brother David Stendelras, always ready to let it go, to let it move for itself, to let it climb down from your knee. That kind of loving, the kind of loving that's both holding on and letting go. Yeah, Robert.
What comes to me is bodily felt listening.
Bodily felt listening. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we're really there. We're really there. And Pam, Melinda, you should call on people because you'll see them better. Pam, yeah.
I love the way, I've heard you say, Lynn, how one, listens for the underneath, for what is trying to come through the cracks. So I would say, there's also a transformational listening when
Oh,
you have
isn't
your
that,
eye to that.
yes, yes, yes. Maybe we should put these in the chat. Transformational listening, felt bodily listening. Was that right, Robert? Loving listening. Steve has one.
A sort of an extension of what Pam said, deep stream listening.
Deep stream listening. Wow, deep stream listening. I like that.
Deep sharing of who we are.
It's a sharing of who we are, right? Yes. And that's sort of that oxygen, that bloodstream we're sharing in this organic interconnectedness. Anybody else?
Compassionate listening.
Compassionate listening. Yes. Yes. Compassionate listening. And that goes along with the receptive listening, the responsive listening, the curious listening. Sometimes when you can't get to the compassion, you can tap into your curiosity. What makes this person feel like this or believe this? Or Jean had pointed that out to me in a reading a paper that I had written that he was sort of helping me with, and said, well, you can't expect to accept what other people say if you don't accept it. But you could be curious about it. Why would this person think this? And that's on the way.
Curious.
And I think that sometimes we get confused and we think that this radical, embodied, compassionate, deep stream, underneath listening is agreeing or going along with, not standing up for what's true, what we think is true, sort of knuckling under, giving ourselves up.
listening
Deep
as,
listening. Yeah, I'm sorry.
listening as one in a way that we are together in this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that. Listening as one. It's like listening to the other person's side of the us. Because whenever we're listening to the us, because there is no I without the us. That other part of the us may seem like way out there, but it's one system, and we're listening to another aspect of one body, that we are all one body. Yeah. Boy, everybody is onto this. I guess we should say deep listening has been a name, right? We should say that name too, this deep listening, this radical listening. So what I want to say, and I want to say it, since this is radical listening, I want to say it in a radical way. Are you ready for this? It's only listening that will save the world. Listening can save the world. Listening can save each one of us. Our own listening to ourselves, the other listening to us, and our listening to the other. Feels to me like it's the hope for a new world, for survival. Listening to the human in the human system is like planting a tree for our natural system. The tree, planting one tree, roots the water and the stability of the ground. It transforms. It does all kinds of things. Planting one tree, and you can watch on PBS The Age of Nature Awakening all the things that planting one tree can do. And I'm not as well versed in expressing that succinctly as I am in saying that in the human system, one experience of real listening, that's another word I would like to call real listening or genuine listening, is giving a new life, a new chance, a new moment, a new body, a new presence, a new beginning. So, when I was a young woman and I first met Gene, he shared so much, turned me on to so much. One of the first things and the most powerful things was hearing him listening. And when I first met him, I, by accident, some of you know the story, went to a workshop where he was just listening to each person. And I was, early in my career looking for something that would bring everything together that I was studying. And I saw him do this and I said, wow, what is this? Oh my God. And Gene told me, and probably many, many other people, it's such a strange, mysterious thing that when you listen to anybody, they become beautiful. And Gene sort of smiled and sat back in his seat and said, so much we can learn from that. And in fact, all of his philosophy proceeds out of that miracle, that amazement, that mystery. And we'll go into that another time maybe. But how is that? You listen to a murderer, you listen to your partner when you're furious at them. Not that I'm equating the two. You listen to your political enemy. You listen to anybody in this way, they become beautiful. And so we want to take a look at some of the elements of that we've touched on. But we want to see what are the secrets of this. One of the things that I want to say is that I've taught listening and enjoyed listening and known about listening since that time with Jean. Oh, I don't know, 40 years ago or something. For 40 years maybe, I've been listening to people and honing my skills and teaching skills about listening. But there are new things that I'm learning about listening now in this social, political, historic crisis, things that I didn't know before. And I want to share with you some of the things that I've known and you probably know, and then some of the things that I'm just learning now, and then maybe hear from you about things that you're just learning now about radical listening. One of the things that I'm just learning now is that listening needs to come before conversation. I was always hoping that you could have a focusing conversation in which both people were both listening and expressing their deep selves. And we can, and we've learned that, and we've developed that. But when you're triggered, when there's polarization, when there's dissociation, when there's crisis, that doesn't work. Because we need to have the listening space in ourselves before we can do this kind of listening. So we need to be listened to and listen to ourselves before we can listen. And the person that we're listening to needs to be listened to generously without any expectation of you understanding them before something new can happen. So I'm learning that in a new way, that listening, radical listening, is not reciprocal. One of the important things that I should have maybe said before, but in focusing, I don't know that the sequences are as important. Radical listening, embodied listening, deep listening is not something that we can sustain in ordinary life all the time, although we might want to, and it's part of mindfulness. But this kind of listening is a practice. It's a healing practice. And as a practice, I love the idea of a practice, because a practice is set aside from ordinary life. And that's what therapy is. Therapy is a practice. I think of therapy as a healing practice. People talk about when they are therapists, talk about having a practice. I have a practice in the village. I have a practice. I'm practicing to be better, a better therapist. I'm practicing with my clients, but it's also a kind of a spiritual practice. It's put aside. And as a practice, listening has boundaries around it. It's like I'm going to deeply listen for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour, whatever it is for you that your capacity is. In our sessions in therapy, we're not doing that kind of intense listening all the time, although we are with our bodies always attuned in our sessions. But that very intent kind of listening to understand is something that is almost like I don't know, like a rich chocolate. It's very, very intense, and we have to put our whole selves in it. And and there must be a kind of boundaries around it in a way. And what enables us to do that as focusing oriented people is we know that we're not listening to a thing. We're not listening to, this is the person's shtick. I don't know if you know shtick, it's Yiddish for it's the thing. We're listening for a process. Jean said, it's never is, it's always becoming. We're listening for a becoming. And that's what Pam reminded us of, that we're listening not to what the person is just saying, the packaged ideas that the person has, or even the story that has been told again and again that the person has. We're listening for where the person is going, for what's underneath, for the deeper point that's becoming. We're on a journey. We're midwives helping to give birth to a new something that wants to come. Jean says that that's the nature of life, is this wanting more life, wanting development, wanting growth. We're listening for what's there that wants to come alive. We're listening for the story under the story. I don't know if you notice, but I got my hair cut yesterday, and I went I went to my little neighborhood hair cutter, and our Russian Queens person, and asked, and he was telling me all about the city and all about how horrible it was while I was away as he was cutting my hair. And then he was telling me about the villain, how horrible the mayor is, and all the terrible things that de Blasio did. And at first I thought, oh, I don't know if I want to hear a tirade, which he was entering into a tirade while I'm getting my hair cut. And then I thought, oh, but this is what this is the planting a tree. What is it? I reminded myself, and sometimes reminding yourself can just sort of reset the course. Oh, I want to know about that. What is that? And I said, and this is a focusing question, right? What's the worst part about him? And then he said, oh, well, he did this and he did that. And I said, oh, and what did that do? That sounds like it was really difficult. What happened in your life with that? And he said, well, of course it was. And then slowly, as he was cutting my hair shorter and shorter, I got more and more of the story under the story of what it was like for him to be him, for what it means to him. And that's what we're listening for. And there's the feeling when we're listening for that, that instead of being captive, like, oh no, I'm, you know, it's my dentist talking to me or my haircutter talking to me, I'm stuck here. Instead of that, it's like, oh, we're on a journey together. Let's see where we get to here, what I can understand of the world that I never would know about without this very particular person in this very particular moment. One of the things that helps me to listen in this way is that I think about it as a basketball game. Some of you have heard me use this analogy, and I know nothing about basketball. And I know you're very forgiving because you're focusers. And some of you aren't focusers and may still be forgiving. But I know that in a basketball game, what you want is you want to get the ball in the basket. And anything that gets in, that's what you have your mind on. You have your eye on that basket. So I'm imagining that if I'm playing a basketball game and it's really important to me, that I'm not worrying about the people on the team I disagree with, or this person is standing too close to me or too far from me, or I don't like the way this was said or done, or anything like that. I'm thinking about getting that ball in the basket. And listening is just like that. It's like when you can get it, what the person is trying to say, the deeper point, it's getting the ball in the basket, and you can say it back. Oh, I get that. Yes. Oh, I see now. Oh, I can understand that, blah, 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 blah. This isn't formal reflecting. This is like that quote, listening to understand, not to reply. And when we listen like that, there are two important parts of it. And there are lots and lots and lots of skills, as those of you who've studied it for billions of years know. But two important parts, and that doesn't take, it takes everything and not a lot. One of the important parts is the attitude, the intent to understand, to be illuminated, to be changed, rather than the intent to change the other person. Of course, that's always there too in the mix. But to be enlightened, to understand. And the other is the intent to connect, that you want to connect with this other aspect of us. You want to connect with this unique, infinitely complex microcosm of the world that this person is. And those two intents are part of wanting to get the ball in the basket. Let me see, there's so much here to say. Well, I did say that we can't do this when we're triggered, right? We can't do this when we're triggered. And sometimes we need to just pause and say, well, give me a moment there to take this in, what you're saying. And just breathe. Sometimes we need to go off and listen to ourselves or be listened to and say, I'll come back and we'll talk more about this. Sometimes the act of listening can change the channel for you. if I remember, like it did for me when I was getting my hair cut, I thought, oh, I want to do this thing. I want to get the ball in the basket, and that the act of listening could change the channel. Sometimes that can work, but we shouldn't pretend that we're listening when we're not listening. Sometimes therapists do that. Say, oh yes, well, I understand, but have you thought of this? Or, well, could you do that? Or maybe he thinks blah, blah, blah. And then I say it's psychosocial education or something. I make an excuse to myself when I can't listen and I'm doing something else, right? Not that we shouldn't ever do those things, but I'm just saying that sometimes we pretend to ourselves to listen, and that doesn't seem to be helpful. But just pausing and getting where we really could be present, I think is more helpful for that. Then there's another thing that's sort of related to this that I got from Jean, and that is to be on its side. This is so hard and so complicated and so simple and so direct and so related to getting the ball in the basket. When you're on its side, it means that you're not fending off the other person's communication. You want to know what it has to say to you, not the surface it, but the deeper it. And you're on the side of it because you deeply believe that it wants life, that it may be going about it the wrong way from your point of view. It may seem self-destructive to you. It may seem like false facts to you. It may seem like being uninformed. It may seem like being wrong and bad, and it may seem lots of things to you. But from its point of view, it's reaching for development. It's reaching for life. And we want to be on that its side. Now, what that takes is giving yourself up. And everybody's going to scream and shout, and maybe some of you have gone away already. Did you come back? Let me explain. We know we're not supposed to give ourselves up. Jim is an expert on that, right, Jim? Don't give yourself up no matter what. Some therapists talk about pathological accommodation, giving yourself up automatically, instinctively, originally maybe to the parent. Not that kind of giving yourself up, but the kind of giving yourself up that Jean talks about when he says that his primary principle in therapy is what he calls putting nothing between. I'm putting nothing between me and that person. Now, my values, my beliefs, my feelings, my intentions, my deep spiritual leanings, my protest, my need to straighten out this world, my convictions, all of those are very, 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 very important. And Jean says, well, I'm putting them right next to me. I can always reach for them again. They're not going away. But I'm not putting them between me and the other person. That is an amazing skill. To give yourself up in that way so that yourself can be right there next to you, helping you without getting in the way. This is what we mean by non-judgment, what we used to learn, you know, in grad schools, non-judgmental listening. I mean, that's fine to say, but oh, that's a big thing. How can we do that? We have to give something of ourselves up just in that moment, just next to us, in order to be on its side, to be able to listen, to understand, not to reply. And we need to sort of recognize that our roots go deep in the ground and that it's okay to put some of those branches just aside and the fruits aside, in order to be right there with the person. Let's see if I have any more things.
Lynn?
Yeah.
Hi. So as you're talking, what keeps coming in me is
Beverly,
every time you're saying Jean, I'm also hearing Carl for me.
Hearing
Carl Rogers.
Carl, of course, because Jean Carl is like the
father
the
of
daddy,
listening.
right? The daddy for Jean. I mean,
yeah.
Carl is a therapist, right? Yes.
Oh, good. I can kind of, now I feel like I can breathe.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yes, it's Carl, it's Jean, it's many other people.
Right.
It will be you too, Beverly. You'll say things that we haven't heard, and it will come through you too. Right. We all learn, we learn from all the people that listen to us and how they listen to us and
Oh, yeah.
how their breathing is when they listen. And if we had time, we would, oh, there's so much we could say, but I think that I want to hear from you a little bit. And then I'm going to do a very short attunement before we go into our breakout rooms. But I want to hear from you first. I want to hear if there's anything new that you learned about listening in this world crisis that we're in, or anything that you have there.
Lynn, I have a question.
Yeah.
About what I heard you say.
Sounds like Sophie, but I don't see you.
Sophie.
Okay, great, sure.
I heard you say, and I don't know if you did say that, I heard you say, listen generously without expectation of me understanding them.
Without an expectation that they're then going to understand me.
And then they will understand me.
No, they may never understand me.
So my intent is to understand. Is it what I'm understanding? My intent is to understand, but I need to let go of my expectation that I'm going
to. Yes. Isn't that radical? Isn't that radical?
Yes.
Of course we want to be understood. We need it. It's our lifeline to be understood, but it may not be from that person that time. It may not be in that way. Maybe somebody else is going to understand but we're going to understand ourselves better as we're going to be changed when we listen to them. So it's going to be a new us that we would want to be understood. The new I in the new us. Yes, that's very, very radical to not expect that the other person is going to understand you back. You're just, if they do, fabulous. But we're not doing it for that.
But I was thinking also to not expect myself to understand.
Oh.
Expectation may keep me away from really listening at first. I may get to the understanding, right?
Yes.
I may not.
Yes. Oh, I love that, Sophie. This is new for me. I love that idea. To not even expect ourselves to really understand, because we can't, the other person is infinite. Something will come in and change us something will open up for us. There'll be some surprise, we hope, some new, but we may not, of course, and never fully understand, but we may not understand it all. But something still new can happen in the system. When we can't, this is another thing and I've talked too long. This is another thing that I want to say here. We cannot expect to change the other. And I'm thinking about this politically as well as individually in terms of parts of us, or dyadically in terms of the other person. We cannot expect to change the other. We change the system by listening, and that changes us. We change ourselves, and then that changes the whole interaction, and we are the interaction, and that changes the other indirectly.
What you said this morning, Lynn, is so profound, but also from someone that.
Okay, Peter, 800 service, I block it.
I don't know what's happening.
Okay, so we're gonna mute ourselves and then just unmute ourselves to speak. Go ahead, Derek. I'm sorry.
I think what you said was very profound there, and for someone that, like myself, that has spent 30 years working within child and family services and working with children who've experienced all sorts of trauma and abuse, the piece that's really important that I hear freshly again this morning is you have to really place aside, like Jean said, your values, your intent, and your convictions of when you hear of horrendous abuse first, to truly understand and allow the child express that and connect with it.
Yes.
Placing it aside. And when you truly hear that, you can then touch into that toolkit to bring out the appropriate boundary response that that child should be experiencing from the adult or their adult carers or the systems that they're living in. I think it's so, so important to distinguish that piece, because that part of you that will be touched by listening to that could derail the essence of the story. And I think that's so, so important.
Yes, 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 yes. Right.
And that's a massive challenge.
Yes.
And the other piece that's really important to say is, it refreshes me to hear as well that you can do it for sustained periods of time, and then your embodied system can grow very exhausted at that deep level.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, but I do want to say that when we need the boundaries around it, it's a practice, but it also feels good.
Yeah, but you see,
yeah,
the beauty of the focusing is when you then bring the boundary and express it in a focusing way, it somehow makes the boundary softer as well, but yes, still is firm, if that makes sense.
Right. And we feel enlivened by being in this process of understanding. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Derek.
I would like to follow up on what Derek said.
Thank you, Joe.
For me, as I think about this, my capacity to deeply listen is directly related to my ability to be vulnerable.
Yes.
But for me, it's all about my ability not to put defenses up, or my values, or my beliefs in what the truth is. I mean, we're talking about a fundamental vulnerability here that allows me to stand with the other person in their place and not mine. But it means I've got to give up a lot. And I think I look at it in terms of hopefully ever increasing my own capacity to deeply listen, by learning how to be more vulnerable.
Yes, thank you, Joe. That's such a good point. And what is her name? Brene Brown, who talks about vulnerability and the courage to be vulnerable as a leader. And that's so important what you're saying. And that is the putting nothing between. You're not defending that self. You're allowing yourself to be right there. Thank you. Dave.
Yeah, well, some of the things that it's kind of an extension, I think, of what that's been spoken so far is that the phrase keeps coming up for me as I was listening to you, was that in some kind of way developing a friendly attitude towards our own, stay with me, towards my own triggers and triggeredness, because anything that's going to be triggered within me at varying kinds of levels of story and the kinds of kind of precious core things that Joe was just talking about, they're underneath the trigger. So then if I can befriend that and be listened to or listen to myself, it'll touch that kind of place, and it'll make it a little easier to put things aside and listen to the other. But it's starting to think about being triggered as not being the enemy. It's kind of like, oh, something here needs some attention.
Yes. Thank you, Steve. I love that idea that being triggered isn't the enemy, and that you're going to attend to it. It's like paying attention to it, that trigger. It's like a little alarm.
Yeah.
Instead of your whole system getting dysregulated, you can say, oh, I'm going to go back to that. Let me put that there and really go back to that. That's important. It's like this. Am I on the right track of what you're getting at there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That trigger is an important doorway into yourself.
Exactly. Doorway. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excuse me, Lynn, are we going to breakout rooms today?
That's a very good question. What do we think? Should we? Oh, this is such a rich discussion. The whole group.
I think we should have breakout rooms.
You think we should
listen in a closer way?
What if we just had 10 minutes, and in those 10 minutes, just partnerships of just sharing what's the hardest to me about listening, and what gets in the way of the listening to each of us, maybe different things, or maybe an experience that was really healing of listening. So we have both those sides. So you'll make the decision yourself.